this video, I'll be covering a few points. First of all, it's how I got into cycling, and then next is how I chose my first ever entry road bike, and then afterwards I'll talk about the bike components and give you a full review of the bike that I currently own, and followed by a 1 minute of ASMR harp sound. So yeah, stay tuned. Alright, so how I actually got into this cycling is pretty interesting. So I wasn't very enthusiastic on cycling at first. In fact, I only do cycling once in a blue moon with my friends. So recently, my girlfriend started to nudge me to cycle, and we actually cycled around the Punggol PCN, and it was pretty nice because we could enjoy the scenery, the breeze. It helps us to keep healthy as well. So overall, I began to somehow found a new appreciation for cycling, and that got me into this whole cycling journey. So at that point of time, my girlfriend actually lent me this very first bike of hers, and she was using her own current bike now. And while we were cycling, I noticed that there was such a big difference between her first bike and her second bike, and that got me into thinking that actually, the performance of the bike is something that I want for myself. So that led me to, start researching more into bike and become more interested in it. And yeah, so this is my newfound hobby. So moving on next is how I chose my very first bike for myself. And I think as an entry beginner person, you will always be flooded by a lot of information, both offline and online, different entry-level bikes on the internet, and then you can do more and more research. Even the second-hand market, that's entirely another thing. So I felt that as a beginner, I don't know a lot of things, and I find that the information is overwhelming. So this is why I decided to create this video to hopefully give you the information that you guys might find helpful when you're choosing a bike. So for me personally, I felt that the performance of the bike is something that I look out for, which is why I decided to choose a road bike instead of like the other types of bikes like hybrid or mountain bike, because I like the thrill of the speed, pedaling each stroke and then feeling yourself go even faster. So road bike was something that caught my attention the most. Eventually, I started looking into more information about road bikes, like what kind of bike should I get for beginner level. One of the biggest consideration as an entry level is always about this risk of knowing, should I pay a big sum of money to get a very decent bike, or should I spend the minimal amount to see if I'm interested in this hobby before investing on a good bike. For me personally, I felt that if I were to spend the minimal amount to get a very cheap road bike, I might not have explored the full experience of the road bike. So I decided to do a little compromise and get something that's slightly better than the entry-level bike. So I was looking at bikes around the $1,000 range. For me, because I value the performance, immediately that time I thought probably it's the gears and whatnot that make the bike more efficient. So I thought the biggest performance value in a bike was the drivetrain of a bicycle. So I started looking into more about the different type of group sets a bike can have. That led me to find the Shimano series. We have the entry level, more of the Sora, the Claris, the Tiagra, the 105. And then after that, we have the Ultegra and Dura Ace, which are more advanced. So for me, I found that, a lot of people are saying 105 is the most performance value group set. And I thought that, that is something that I want for myself as well. I did thought of getting the lower tier group set like Sora and Claris. Those bikes generally cost way lesser. You can find them easily below $1,000. But for me, I didn't want to compromise that experience itself, so I was willing to pay a bit more to get a 105 group set for myself. So immediately when I chose my first bike, right? So I wanted a bike that has a 105 group set. So that was my main criteria. And then after that, which fall on the price, whichever I can find the bike with 105 and it's the cheapest, I think that would be my ideal entry level bike. So I started looking on various big companies, like Giant, there's Trek, Polygon, there's the most, beginner friendly Decathlon and everything. So there are a few famous brands like Giant, Specialized, all this. I think those bikes that come with the 105 tend to cost way more, like as in, I guess around $2,000 and above. Then there are other brands like Van Rysel series from Decathlon, which starts at about 1,600-ish. There's also the very famous Triben RC, I think 520 or something. That is the very popular $1,000 bike. They also have the 105, but it's a mixed group set, but it's quite valuable as well. And then we have other brands like Polygon, which also sells around $1,600 as well for around the same specs. And then we also have this more affordable budget bike from Java itself, but I was a little skeptical about their build quality, so I did not really consider those. So then I also came across Mobot, and they also sell the road bike, and that is how I first got into knowing this CAMP Impala bike that they have. And at the point when I purchased the bike, there was an ongoing sale. So initially the bike cost I think $1,599, but because of the offer it came at around $1,199. So putting that into perspective, this CAMP Impala bike that cost 1.2k was way more affordable than say the $1,600 from Polygon or the Van Rysel. I did not count into the Triben series because it's always out of stock and I wasn't going to wait for it to come. So that's how I navigated to settling on this CAMP Impala bike, which has a 105 in it, but it's a mixed group set, which I'll talk about it more in a bit. Also, I think a lot of you guys might say like, there's the second-hand market, you can get way more value bikes there, better parts and all at a cheaper price, which I agree, but I think at that point as a beginner, I don't know any specification, I know nothing about the components, I don't know what is value for how much and all, and I felt like because of all these things and I don't know how to check the working conditions of each bike because I have no experience, right? So eventually I settled that second-hand bike doesn't really fit my criteria as of now. I rather just buy a bike with the peace of mind and get everything. So moving on to the bike components. Before I start, I just want to put a disclaimer that I am not sponsored by Mobot or by any of the components that I actually bought. So this is just my honest review and my experience so far. Your mileage might vary from mine. A bit more about myself is that for me, I am 187 cm tall and I weigh about 73-ish kg. So immediately when I head down to the Mobot store, they recommended me the L size CAMP Impala, and of course I tried that and I thought that was quite a good fit for me, so I decided to buy it. So this CAMP Impala, selling point of this bike is that it's using a Shimano 105 mixed group set. So I will now talk about the components of each bike. First of all, when we look at this bike itself, it comes with a aluminium frame with carbon fork. So as a beginner cyclist, I'm sure people have talked about the different kinds of frame. So mainly there's two, there's the aluminium frame as well as the carbon frame. As a beginner myself, I feel that aluminium frame provides a better peace of mind because it's generally more durable. I am not sure how I will handle my bike. I might accidentally damage the carbon frame, which means additional cost and all. So for that I chose the aluminium frame, and it comes with a carbon fork, so it helps to kind of cushion the impact when you ride as well. The handlebar is 40mm wide, nothing too special. I have not had any problems with it so far throughout my rides. It's generally quite sturdy and comfortable enough for me. And then moving on to the front part, we have the Shimano 105 shifters. Right, the shifters are generally quite smooth, and I have also had no issues with it. Moving on to the saddle, I did find that I'm not very used to the seat experience that a road bike has. It tends to be a little more uncomfortable, so I decided to get this memory foam cushion from Decathlon just to sort of make it a bit more comfortable. I also bought a pair of bib shorts so that, additional cushion on it. I don't know if that's the recommended way, but so far it made my ride much more bearable if I'm going for like 2 to 3 hours ride. So next, moving on to the drivetrain. This CAMP Impala features both front and rear derailleur from Shimano 105. However, it being a mixed group set, the crankset, the cassette and the chains, they are not from 105. So the cranks is, or rather the chain ring itself, is actually from the Victor, which is 34 to 50 teeth. For the cassette wise behind, it's about 11 to 28 teeth. And of course for the pedals, I'm just using stock pedals for now. So for these stock pedals, I do think they work generally okay. For me, I have not gotten myself into the whole realm of clipless pedals. I think those are a little too advanced for me for now, because the thought of having to, get yourself used and practice on those clipping in and clipping out. I mean, the fear of, unable to clip out in case of emergency is a little daunting for me. So I'm happy to stick with the basic flat pedals for now. I do want to stress that these flat pedals are generally okay, but their grip is not that good, so you might want to invest on a better flat pedals. I personally have chosen to get a better shoes with better grip. The shoes that I'm using now is from Adidas and it's the 510 series shoe. It's working well enough, and I do think that the power transfer with the grip and all is actually quite noticeable as compared to when I'm just wearing a normal sport shoe. So this is something that you might want to consider also. But of course in future, I do want to try clipless pedals. The CAMP Impala comes with a dual pivot calipers from Tektro. I think it's the R313 series. For me personally, I think the rim brake on this bike is a little weak. I did test out a few rides at the start. I think it was okay, but just that over time, I think the real rim brake was weak in the sense that when I pressed a certain degree on the brake lever itself, it didn't kind of stop the bike as much as I want to. So I felt the braking performance was weak in that sense. So because of that, I've decided to swap out the stock brake for the Shimano Ultegra brakes itself. At that point of time, I was deciding between the 105 rim brakes itself or these Ultegra brakes. But then I realized that actually the price difference between the two is not that huge, so I opted for the Ultegra one. And so far, I think ever since I swapped over to these new brakes itself, I think the braking performance was way better. Like the Ultegra was more stiffer and I generally feel more confident. Another point to note is that when I was using the stock rim brakes, I noticed that sometimes when I'm on my ride and it rains and the pavements are wet and all, the braking performance is generally much weaker. So this is something that you might want to look out for. So I've also researched a bit that rim brakes are a little more weaker when it comes to wet surfaces. So then there will come another topic between should I choose a rim brake or a disc brake. So I will leave that up to you. But for me myself, as a beginner, I feel like let me just get used to the rim brakes. Eventually I will try to experiment with disc brakes as well to see the difference. But so far I think the Ultegra rim brakes, they do a good job enough. For the stock wheel set, it's an aluminum rim and it comes with, I think, Novatec hubs. So the tires, I think they are from TST Cesar series. So it's a 700C and it's about 25mm wide tires. So my personal experience with this set of wheels is that I was a little bit uncomfortable with 25mm tires, and that's because like after riding it for a few times, I generally find uncomfortable that the tires are thinner, because that will mean higher tire pressure. So as you ride along like small bumpy roads, you can actually feel the impact each time. Not only that, thinner tires, especially during wet surfaces, I tend to skid more, so that doesn't give me the confidence of the riding, as I have to constantly think about, okay, I need to be careful. So I decided to swap out the stock wheel set for something that suits me more. So I headed down to Build Wheels, and they actually recommended this set of aluminium rims that are upgrade to what I have owned currently. So for those of you, you might say that, oh, you know, like you can swap out to carbon rims as well, but my argument for that currently is I'm still trying to explore. Of course, eventually I might try carbon wheels, but I think I am too worried about, you know, breaking things, or like just having that thought that things might break if I'm not careful. So I would rather have that peace of mind to get the aluminium rims first. So the one that I got is aluminium rims from Velocity Quill, and it features a Wide Industry T11 hub. So my personal experience with this rim is that it's compatible to be either tubeless or clinchers. So I actually installed the tubeless version for this with the tires of Continental GP 5000 28M tires, and run tubeless on this setup. And my experience with the tubeless wheel set has been quite great so far. I'm able to run at a lower tire pressure, maybe around 70-ish like that, and I've noticed a great difference in terms of the comfort as you ride. And so far I think that was a really good buy. The 28mm also gives me more confidence in terms of the bike handling, as well as the tires that give more grip as compared to the stock wheel set. So moving on to the accessories that I have on my bike. For me now, I'm just mounting this Tribon phone holder as my main navigation system. I may look into investing a bike computer in future, but for now I'll just make do with my phone to help me navigate around and, you know, for Strava generally. And then I have a bell on my left hand side. I've noticed that not a lot of people put bell on a road bike. I could be wrong, it's just that I never really noticed it. But for me, as a beginner, I generally tend to ride on the pavement more than the road usually, because that gives me like sort of like a practice, you know, like. And so for pavement itself, it can be a little inconvenient at times, you know, because there are places where, like as you go by train stations or bus stops, the human traffic tends to be more. So a bell really helps in that sense. So this is something that you guys might consider as well. Next would be, of course, just a general tip: do equip yourself with a front and a rear light as far as possible because of safety reasons. I have had a few rides at night where the pavement are quite dark, and it was a bit difficult to see incoming cyclists if they do not have their front light on. And that is really dangerous because, like, especially when the pavements are narrow, you can't really see the clearance until they get really close, and by then it might be too late to react. So a front light will help me to see them from afar and plan accordingly. So that has been quite a lifesaver. And of course, do remember to wear your helmet when you ride as well, just for, you know, safety. To sum up everything, I would like to talk about my main overall experience with this CAMP Impala bike so far. This bike generally shifts really well, it being a Shimano 105. I would have to say on the preface that I do not have any comparison to be done on the other Shimano group sets like the Sora or the Clarice. I do think that there are a lot of other videos or reviews on those group set that you can look into. For me personally, this 105 group set is good enough. I might plan to upgrade in future, I don't know. So that is something I look forward to as well. So generally on flats, they are okay. I haven't had any issue. I have not done much climbs yet, so I will not be able to provide a valuable input on that. So next, I would also like to talk about the experience I had when I buy the bike from Mobot. I think the Mobot service generally is quite good. They are very helpful in helping you to solve problems. One issue I had when I first purchased the bike was that when the bike was delivered to me and having taken it for a test ride on the day itself, I noticed that the front gear doesn't shift. So I thought it was a bit weird and I hit down to the Mobot store to rectify that. And turns out that I think the front wire was not tightened properly. So there may be a bit of like a QC issue over here, something to look out for, or maybe it's just me and that bike itself. Another thing I noticed is that throughout cycling, I have had some weird huge clack sound I experienced when near the crankset when I pedal, especially when I put in like suddenly a very strong force. I'm not sure if it's because of the crankset that is causing this or generally the drivetrain. I do not experience it that often, but I did notice that, so I will have to see if there's any problems in the future. Another tip is that I've checked with Decathlon because this CAMP Impala bike is also featured on the Decathlon website as well. And if you're actually buying the bike from them, they do not really service the bike because they are technically just the distributor of this CAMP Impala bike, so they will not be able to do the bike services. So even though you purchase from them online, so a word of advice is that if you want to get this bike, I think it's a good idea to head down to the Mobot store and try it personally and get it from them, because then they are able to offer you the full range of bike maintenance and repair services if needed. So another point to consider is also that the stock components used in this bike is not to my liking after a few rides. For example, the rim brakes are a little weaker than I would have liked, and then the wheel set, it being 25mm, was a little uncomfortable. So these are the things that you might want to look out for in future as well. One thing I think is nice is that you can get a decent entry-level road bike and experiment with the different components, find out what you like and what you don't like, and eventually know like, oh okay, what can I upgrade to, what components is the next tier, and slowly, once you try out and you find your preferences, then investing into a better second bike would be I think a more logical approach. So that's it for this video. I hope this information is helpful because I noticed that there are not a lot of reviews on this bike as this bike is rather new. So hopefully this will be able to give you a good and clearer picture of what you're getting yourself into if you decide to choose this bike. And of course, I think the bike is very subjective. So I will always recommend you to head down to any bike store to try any bikes before committing into one. If you do find this video helpful, just do remember to give a like, and good day to you. Bye bye!